Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of KRAD COVID Readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, reading my writing to make the pandemic palatable. We are now on to part 3 of my HEROES REBORN novella, Save the Cheerleader, Destroy the World, which serves to bridge the gap between the end of the 4th-season Heroes TV show that started in 2006 and the 13-episode Heroes Reborn miniseries that aired in 2015. All from the point of view of Claire, the cheerleader in question. Without further ado, let's keep going. Chapter 11, 25 October 2011. Excerpt from a New York One broadcast, New York, New York. I'm standing right now in front of the Petrelli for Congress offices on 3rd Avenue and 62nd Street. It was from this office that Nathan Petrelli made his run for representative of New York's 14th Congressional District. The office was shuttered when Petrelli won the election, but then withdrew for personal reasons. Petrelli was later appointed by Governor Malden to be the junior senator from New York to replace Senator Dickinson when he passed away. Petrelli himself died last year. For that entire time, these offices have been closed. But today, members of the media were invited to a press conference being held by Peter Petrelli, the late senator's younger brother. The younger Petrelli has had a history of depression that became tabloid fodder during his older brother's campaign. But lately, he's been working as an EMT here in New York. And now someone's coming out the front door, and it's Mr. Petrelli. Let's listen. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, thank you for coming. My brother, rest his soul, believed in the fundamental human rights of all people. He believed not only in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, but also Amnesty International's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I know, if he was alive today, he would have voted for the Evo Registration Act back in January, and he would have voted against it last week. As it's been rewritten, the Evo Act is wrong. The Universal Declaration states that every human being is entitled to basic human rights, such as equal protection and freedom from discrimination without distinction of any kind, such as on the basis of race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinions, national or social origin, property, or other status. The Evo Act, as it's been rewritten, violates the Constitution and violates the Declaration. I will not be registering with the Department of Homeland Security. I have many friends who are also Evos, and they will not be registering with the Department of Homeland Security. We will not stand by and be discriminated against. Oh, tell me you got that. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Petrelli just grimaced for a second, and then he literally disappeared. I've never seen anything like it, though I guess it confirms that he's an Evo. Once again, Peter Petrelli, the younger brother of the late Senator Nathan Petrelli, is an Evo, and has just declared war on the rewritten Evo Act. He claims to speak for many Evos when he says he won't abide by it, and quoted Amnesty International's Universal Declaration of Human Rights to support his argument. It looks like the line between Evos and us regular humans are being drawn. Chapter 12. 4 November 2011. Place de la Concorde, Paris, France. Antoine Mercier stood in front of the Rue Royale, right by the obelisk that was the centerpiece of the Place de la Concorde, chanting, "Je ne vais pas déclarer," over and over again, together with several others. One of the people nearby was holding a sign with those words in French, another in Spanish, a third in German. "Je ne vais pas déclarer." The plaza was filled with people protesting the European Union's passing of droit dévolu déclaré. I used to be able to speak French, I'm sorry. Some were Evos openly displaying their powers, like the woman who was flying and the man who was setting off fireworks from the tips of his fingers. Others were normal people who had joined the group in solidarity. Antoine couldn't always tell, of course. His mentor, a secretive but brilliant Anglais named Claude, had always told him that the reason why normal people feared Evos was because they generally looked just like normal people until they used their powers. Je ne vais pas déclarer. In Antoine's case, he could manipulate light. Claude had shown him how to make himself invisible by bending light waves around himself, a skill Claude himself had. However, Claude was limited to that invisibility, though it wasn't much of a limitation, truth be told. Antoine could also create light shows and make lasers and change the colors of things. It was actually fun, but totally harmless. Well, except for the laser part. He saw no reason to tell the government about his private life. Je ne vais pas déclarer. And then the gendarmes showed up, dressed in riot gear. In French, one of the police said into a megaphone, "This is an illegal gathering! Disperse immediately! Je ne vais pas déclarer!" Two women flew up into the air, arm in arm. Antoine figured that one of them could fly and was carrying the other. One of the women spoke in German, her voice projecting louder than the megaphone. "We will not surrender! The Petrelli Movement will not be stopped!" Then in French, she repeated, "The Petrelli Movement will not be stopped!" Then in Italian, then in English. She also said something in a language he didn't recognize, though he could make out the word Petrelli. The people around them all started shouting, "The Petrelli Movement will not be stopped!" Peter Petrelli's speech in New York had gotten billions of hits on YouTube and had become the rallying cry of Evos throughout Europe and elsewhere, but Antoine didn't much care about what went on outside his home. Petrelli had galvanized Evos all over the world by quoting the Declaration of Human Rights. Americans usually just talked about their own country, as if it were the only one in the world. Petrelli recognized that there was a world beyond the United States. And then, when the EU fell into line behind the US, just like it always did, by passing a similar law, the Evos and other people of the EU responded. The gendarmes were unimpressed with the human amplifier. "Disperse immediately!" Antoine used his powers to pull the light reflecting off the parts of the place he couldn't see into his own line of sight, so that he could observe the whole scene. There were snipers set up on the roofs of the buildings on the Rue Royale, and other officers coming from all sides. They were being surrounded. "Oh, this isn't good," he muttered to himself in French. Next to him, a British girl asked in English, "What is it?" They are surrounding us," he said in their language. "This will end poorly." "Let them try, yeah?" The girl held up her right hand, which started to glow. In French, the gendarme with the megaphone, said, "If you do not disperse, we will be forced to take action." But it could barely be heard over the multilingual chant of "The Petrelli Movement will not be stopped." "Disperse immediately! Je ne peux pas déclarer! The Petrelli Movement will not be stopped! If you do not disperse now, we will open fire! The Petrelli Movement will not be stopped!" Thanks to his bending of the light, Antoine could see the sniper on the nearest rooftop, and he could also see the girl next to him. So he knew that they both acted at the same time. The sniper fired from his rifle just as the British girl let loose with a stream of heat from her hand. And then the girl right beside her fell over. And with a shock, Antoine realized that the sniper had seen the girl's glowing hand and had fired at her to keep her from using her powers. Too late, as it happened. The stream of heat engulfed two of the gendarmes, who immediately caught fire and went screaming and running through the place. Chaos erupted a moment later as the police opened fire and several Evos used their powers. Antoine was one of the latter. He reached out with his power and forced the light to bend around several of the weapons being held by the police. The guns were still there, just no longer visible, which at least got some of them to stop shooting for a moment. Fireworks exploded under two of the policemen, and three of the gendarmes found their riot gear turned to stone, trapping them inside their own clothes. One of the things Claude had drilled into him from the get-go was that when things got bad, get out. Since Antoine could make himself invisible, he bent the light around himself so that no one could see him, and then got as far away from the Place de la Concorde as quickly as he could. As he ran, he heard the sounds of gunfire and of various powers being used, and he heard the screams of the wounded on both sides. He no longer heard any chants. Chapter 13. 15 November 2011, a guest editorial in Washingtonian Magazine by Claire Petrelli. The tragedy in Paris earlier this month was one of the worst events of recent history, and it never should have happened. There are serious problems with human Evo relations, not just in our country, but all over the world. Paris proved that, but violence is not the solution to the problem. All the riot in the Place de la Concorde accomplished was to make things worse. Ever since his speech in New York, my uncle, Peter Petrelli, has been the unofficial spokesman for what everyone is now calling the Petrelli Movement. But this is one Petrelli who doesn't endorse it. I love my uncle. I do. He's done a lot of good over the years as a hospice nurse, as an EMT, and as an Evo. He stayed under the radar until now. Very few people know how much good he's done, how many lives he's saved. But what he's doing now is wrong, and it needs to stop. It's not going to be easy. But Evos are here to stay, and everyone has to accept that. I agree with Peter on so many things. The Evo Act, as it was originally passed in January, was perfect. The amendments are wrong, and I've said so, in public and in private. I've even been lucky enough to be able to express my reservations to the president himself. At the very least, I can attest that there's a dialogue going on. This so-called Petrelli movement isn't a dialogue. It's a screaming match, and then it's a fight. When Peter gave his speech in New York last month, it was like lighting the fuse on a stick of dynamite. And now it's blowing up in all our faces. We need to live in peace with one another. The reason why I've been open about being an Evo is to show that it can work. But also it's important that people who want to stay hidden can do that too. The United States has been a leader in the world ever since the early 20th century. And we need to be the leader now. And that means not treating Evos like second-class citizens. It means letting us live our lives like normal people, not forcing us to register, not forcing us to let the government keep track of us. If we act like we care about the rights of all our citizens, the rest of the world will follow suit. The droit de voler déclaré only passed in the European Union because of the amendments to the Evo Registration Act here. A couple of years ago, my father, Senator Nathan Petrelli, started a program that was much worse than what's happening now. Evos were being rounded up and held without warrants and without due process. We just were kidnapped and locked away without anyone knowing what had happened to us or why. Nobody really knows about this program, even now. There were some news stories, but they quieted down pretty quick because there was no evidence. And that's the worst thing, because nobody knew we were even there in the first place. Nobody knew that we were being treated this way. At the very least, that can't happen anymore. That's why I revealed myself last year, and that's why I've stayed in the public eye. The people who want us locked up, want us put away, can't treat us that way anymore. But they can still treat us like second-class citizens. This has to stop. And I believe it will. The history of our country is one in which people are gradually granted more rights than they had before. The Founding Fathers wanted more rights than they had under King George. After the Civil War, people with darker skin came to have the same rights as those with lighter skin, although the struggle was long and hard. In 1920, women won the right to vote. And now we're seeing homosexuals get the same right as heterosexuals. We have to do the same for Evos. We have to be treated like people, not like non-humans. Peter was right about one thing, whether it's the Constitution or the Declaration of Human Rights. We are still human, and we still deserve the same rights as everyone else. So today I'm begging, please stop the violence. If you're part of the Petrelli Movement, please don't use violence to resolve the problems you're having. And if you're a member of the government of any nation, from the President of the United States to the Council of the European Union to all the other governments throughout the world, please do not make the registration of Evos mandatory. Let us have our choice. This article was written with the assistance of Washingtonian reporter Sabrina Piazza. Chapter 14, 24 November 2011. The French House, Brentwood, Missouri. A year ago, Noah Bennett had hosted the world's most awkward Thanksgiving dinner. It had been, he knew, a pathetic attempt at normalcy in a life that had stopped being normal the moment his first wife was killed by an Evo while pregnant with their child. Even his second marriage had started out as a sham, a cover to make his life look more normal than it really was. Hardly a surprise that Sandra left him. The only surprise was that it took her so long. But he tried. He got Sandra and Doug and Claire's roommate, as well as Lauren, who had saved his ass with regard to food preparation, to all show up. It actually wasn't nearly as bad as it could have been, but it was still pretty dreadful, all things considered. Noah had put the Thanksgiving dinner together because the company had been disbanded, leaving him with nothing but his family. However, with Sandra gone, Lyle gone with her, and Claire off to college, he didn't even have that. Now it was a year later, and he was back out in the field, doing what he had believed a year ago to be impossible: bagging and tagging. Well, tagging anyhow, and the only bagging if they resisted. It was an interesting change. Erica Kravitz had not accepted all of Noah's recommendations, but Noah had to give her credit for at least listening to all of them and giving them a fair hearing. And one suggestion she embraced wholeheartedly was the company's one of us, one of them policy for fieldwork. If you're going after Evos, he had said to her in one of their many meetings following that fateful morning in the Oval Office, you need to have an Evo around in case things get ugly. Some of these people are incredibly dangerous. They might be more compliant if they see one of our own helping them out. One of us were recruited from FBI, NSA, CIA, DHS, ICE, and various police departments. One of them were all registered Evos who had volunteered or, in some cases, been recruited. In fact, some of the latter came from the same pool as the former. Matt Parkman hadn't been the only law enforcement type to develop powers. Indeed, Noah had suggested recruiting Parkman, but Erica had told him that he declined. Lauren had also been tapped, but she too declined, saying that the whole nonsense with the Sullivan Brothers Carnival, culminating in Claire's coming out in Central Park, had pretty much put her off of Evos. She was happy to stay in the CIA and gather intelligence on foreign nations like a normal spook. Noah envied her the choice. But as last Thanksgiving had shown him, he wasn't really good at anything else but this. His partner was a very large and very intelligent man named Caspar Abraham. His powers related to memory, though unlike, say, Renee, he didn't eliminate them so much as transfer them to inanimate objects. He chose to use pennies as his repository, mostly so he could make penny-for-your-thoughts jokes. Noah expected to stop wincing at that any day now. As Noah drove the rental car through the tree-lined streets of a St. Louis suburb, Caspar was finishing up a phone call. "Yes, of course. I'll be home tomorrow, and I've already made the reservations at Giovanni's. I'll make this up to you, sweetheart. Love you too. Bye." Noah smiled. "Gladys is pissed, huh?" Caspar shrugged. "I wonder when I took the job that the hours would be inconsistent. The weekends and holidays were fair game. Guess she either didn't believe me or just didn't think it through." Noah pulled up in front of the house of their target, a building that reminded Noah far too much of the house in Odessa. It was your standard two-level house of the type that had been built during the Great Suburban Migration of the 1950s. Looking up and down the street, Caspar said, "I hate suburbia." Noah shot him a look. "Why?" "Intellectually, I know I'm in Missouri because we flew into Lambert, but if you put me into a coma back in D.C. and woke me up here, I'd have absolutely no idea where I was. This looks just like every other suburban street in the country. Now, if you woke me in New York, or San Francisco, or Chicago, or Dallas, or in St. Louis proper, I'd know immediately where I was. Cities have personality. They have character. This? It's like that Pete Seeger song, little boxes made of ticky-tack." Caspar shook his head and smiled beneath his salt and pepper goatee. "Sorry, arguments with Gladys always make me philosophical." Frowning, Noah said, "That didn't sound like an argument to me." Well, Gladys is very controlled. It's one of the things I love about her, honestly, that she doesn't fly off at the handle. If you'd heard her side of the conversation, you'd have noticed how terse she was, how clipped. That's how I know she's pissed. Trust me, that was an argument, and I didn't win. Remembering his own shouting matches with Sandra, particularly when she realized how many times Noah had had Renee alter her memories, Noah had to admit to himself that Caspar and Gladys's versions of marital distress was a lot more civilized. But he said nothing aloud. Sandra was the past, and he needed to focus on the present. Caspar got out of the passenger side and then opened the back door to retrieve the briefcase in which he kept his penny supply. "So what's this one's name again?" "Alexander French." He retrieved the manila folder from the back seat. "This is the company's file on him. We never got around to tagging him. As far as we could tell, his only ability was to see very far. Not a big priority." "Well, let's just hope he isn't away visiting family for Thanksgiving." Caspar headed toward the front door. Noah followed, hearing a susurrus of voices from inside. "Looks like our guy is the host." "Lucky us." Caspar rang the doorbell. After a moment, the door opened to reveal a white male in his 30s or 40s with perfectly combed hair, wearing a polo shirt, Dockers, and white sneakers. With a big smile on his face, the man said, "Happy Thanksgiving! What can I do for you folks?" "Are you Alexander French?" "Absolutely. And you are?" Reaching into his jacket pocket, Caspar pulled out his ID. Belatedly, Noah did likewise. The hardest adjustment he had to make in working as a government contractor as opposed to the company was that he was now on official business and had actual legal authority. "My name is Caspar Abraham, and this is Noah Bennett. We're with Renatus, a company that's been contracted by the U.S. government." French's eyes went wide. "Wow! Huh. I can't imagine what the government would need with me, but why don't you come in? We haven't sat down to dinner yet, but I'm sure Eleanor can scare you up some hors d'oeuvres. I'm sure Eleanor can scare you up some hors d'oeuvres." He pronounced the last two words closer to horses d'oeuvres than the actual pronunciation. Noah heard the clacking of claws on linoleum and recognized it instantly as the tread of a dog. This one was heavier and slower than Mr. Muggles, though. Peering over French's shoulder, he saw a big golden retriever ambling up toward the door. French turned and said, "Scooter, sit!" The dog whined softly and then sat on the foyer floor. "Good dog!" He turned back to Noah and Caspar. "Sorry about that. Old Scooter Pie there always thinks that anyone who walks in the door is here to see him. Come on in." Scooter raised his head when they entered, and he looked right at Noah. Unable to resist, Noah knelt down and pet the dog. Scooter immediately lay down on the floor. "He likes you, Mr. Bennett, but that's not surprising. Scooter likes everyone." French closed the door behind them. "Now then, what can I do for you boys?" Noah actually smiled. Mr. Muggles had always been Sandra's, and to the point of obsession, but he had to admit that he missed the unconditional love that a dog would give a human in exchange for a simple belly rub. Love, conditional or otherwise, had been in short supply in Noah's life. From his kneeling position, Noah said, "Mr. French, are you familiar with the term evolved human, or Evo?" "Oh, sure, like those folks in Paris that went all crazy. Matter of fact, we had an Evo around here lately." A woman walked into the foyer from the living room, which Noah could now see was filled with people of varying ages sitting on the couch, One of several chairs or the floor. A large flat-screen TV was attached to the wall. Noah couldn't see the screen from this angle, but based on the brass band noise coming from the living room, they were probably watching the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. The woman passed in front of a professionally taken photograph of French, her, Scooter, and a little boy. Noah guessed that this was Eleanor. "What's going on, Alex?" she asked. "Ellie, these gents are from the government, if you can believe that. They're asking about Evos. Who was that guy who broke into the Home Depot last week?" "It wasn't a guy, it was old Karen Erickson, and it wasn't the Home Depot, it was the church." Noah winced. He knew that name from a report that had crossed his desk. French snapped his fingers. Right. Well, anyhow, Karen went up and tore up the church. She didn't mean to, but she really didn't know her own strength. Come to think of it, I didn't see her this past Sunday. Noah stood up, prompting a minor yelp from Scooter. "I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I'm afraid that Ms. Erickson had to be hospitalized following the incident. She died of a heart attack a week ago." "Oh, that's horrible!" French put his hand to his mouth. But Eleanor was frowning. "Mind telling me how you know that?" Casper answered her. "Ms. Erickson was registered with the Department of Homeland Security, ma'am, as all Evos are required by law to be. Which," Noah added, "is why we're here. Mr. French, I'm afraid that you're also an Evo and that you are, as yet, unregistered." "Beg your pardon?" French sounded genuinely surprised. "You haven't noticed yourself manifesting any strange powers?" Casper asked. Eleanor gave him a gentle slap on his arm. "Now, Alex, I told you that your vision was getting better." "Well, sure, Ellie, but I just thought that was because I ate so many carrots." Casper regarded French curiously. "How far can you see, Mr. French?" Well, I didn't want to say anything, but I'm guessing that's a rental car you're driving? You ought to let those fellows at the office know there's a ding just below the gas tank." Noah and Casper exchanged glances. Noah had actually spotted that particular dent, but he'd had to peer very closely at the car to see it. He had asked the rental agent to make a note of it so they wouldn't be penalized for it when they returned the car. "Look, I don't want to stop you boys from doing your job, and I certainly don't want to be doing anything illegal. Believe you me, if I'd known I was one of those Evo people, I'd have signed right up, or whatever it is I'm supposed to do." "You're not that far off," Casper said. "We have some paperwork we'll need you to fill out, and you'll need to make an appointment at the nearest registration center. There's one in St. Louis you can go to." "That shouldn't be a problem at all. Look, I've got a little den in the back of the house. Normally I'd say let's do this in the dining room or the kitchen, but the dining room table's all nice and set up for dinner as soon as the parade's over, and I think Ellie'd kill me if we invaded her kitchen. So, why not step this way and we can take care of business?" Noah nodded. "Yes, thank you, Mr. French. That would be excellent." French led them through the living room, stepping over children running around, one of whom was the boy in the picture, the others looking similar enough to obviously be related, and said, "Don't mind us, folks. These gents are here to take care of some paperwork. We'll be done in a jiff." "Geez, who does paperwork on Thanksgiving?" an older man asked from the couch. As they moved through the living room, Noah caught a glimpse of the TV screen and nearly stumbled in surprise. Standing on one of the floats, waving at the crowd on Fifth Avenue, surrounded by people in full-body costumes that seemed to represent some manner of animated creature Noah didn't recognize, was Claire. A chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Claire Petrelli, Evo Activist." Noah also noticed that there was a man standing unobtrusively in a corner of the float who had the unmistakable look of a bodyguard. He was grateful, at least, that she seemed to have some kind of security detail, and he wondered who was providing it. Knowing Angela, it was probably her. The older man on the couch snorted again. "Don't know why she gets to be on a float. Lousy freak show." Noah just stood and stared at the screen. Casper put a hand on his shoulder. "You okay, Noah?" He turned and stared at Casper as if he had no idea who the man was. And for a second, he didn't. For a second, it was a year ago, and Claire was in his apartment, and they were eating a mediocre turkey, and he shook his head. "I'm fine. Sorry, just drifted away for a second. Let's go get this man signed up." Chapter 15. For December 2011, the Petrelli House, Vienna, Virginia. Claire had started to take bets on the second string of her security detail. Agents Hopwood and Uduana remained the primary agents assigned to her, and they worked 5 8-hour shifts a week, Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 6. However, the agents working the 6 to 2 and overnight 2 to 10 shifts rotated every week, as did those who worked the Sunday and Monday weekend. The bets took the form of what the new rotation would bring. Would the agents be tall or short, male or female, friendly or terse? What race? Most had either been white or black, with a few Latinos and one Asian woman who had a weekend day shift. The second string shifts were staggered so that they changed at different times, but Sunday always meant a new weekend day shift pair, while Anna and Bekenya went off to do whatever Secret Service agents did on their weekends. But Kenya, she knew, would spend time with her wife and daughter, also volunteer at a karate dojo. As for Anna, Claire had no idea. Agent Hopwood was one of the terse ones. Excuse me. On this particular Sunday, she bet that it would be a new Paris she'd never seen before. She lost. A black sedan pulled up to the house on Fox Rest Lane, and out came agents Arbucci and Rodriguez, who'd been her day shift detail over Halloween weekend. They'd been kept pretty busy, as Claire had spent much of that weekend doing appearances and events for various children's charities. After they formally relieved the overnight pair, Claire smiled at them. "Didn't think I'd see you two again after Halloween." "You kidding?" Naomi Rodriguez said. "You were easy. Last year I had to do the president's kids trick-or-treating. That's a nightmare. Watching you talk to a bunch of kids in a hospital is a cakewalk. Anyhow, you're clear today, right?" "Yes," Claire said emphatically. "I've been going non-stop since Thanksgiving. And tomorrow I'm back with Dr. Shu, and then it's more appearances through to New Year's. I just want today to be a day of rest. Just me, the couch, and Netflix." Rodriguez smiled. "Sounds like a plan." However, Nick Arbucci was frowning. "Who's Dr. Shu?" Smacking Arbucci on the arm, Rodriguez said, "You remember the geneticist who's checking out her blood?" "Oh, yeah, right," Arbucci said weakly. "You okay, Nicky?" Rodriguez sounded concerned. No, I'm fine. Just not enough caffeine this morning." "It's your own damn fault for not ordering the double latte like usual. Tell you what, you stay inside and caffeinate, I'll do the perimeter." Arbucci nodded. The rest of the morning went smoothly. Claire caught up on a rom-com she'd been wanting to see, and Arbucci gamely pretended like he was interested in it too. At noon, Rodriguez took her lunch break. She actually took the car and went off somewhere to eat. Not typical, but she'd done that last time too. Arbucci took advantage of this to do the perimeter, a good excuse to get far away from any more chick flicks. Then, just a few minutes into the next film, Arbucci came running in. "Change of plan." Pausing the movie, Claire asked, "What's going on?" "You need to pack right now. There's a credible threat. We need to get you to Dulles." Claire frowned. "The airport?" That was odd. The other time she'd been flown somewhere on the urging of the federal government, it had been on a military aircraft out of Andrews Air Force Base. "Hurry, go!" "Shouldn't we wait for Naomi?" "There's no time. You have 1 minute to pack what you want. Go!" Claire ran upstairs and threw about a week's worth of clothes into a suitcase along with all of her toiletries. She paused long enough to shake her head ruefully. The last few years had taught her a bit too much about cutting down to the bare essentials. As a 14-year-old, she would have overstuffed 3 suitcases. Now she still had plenty of room in her smallest overnight bag. Running downstairs with the bag slung over her shoulder, she said, "I'm ready." "Good." Arbucci led her to an SUV that was idling in front of the house. "Turn your phone off," he said as he opened the back door for her. "We can't risk it being tracked." "It's already off." Another lesson Claire had learned from life as an Evo, not to mention as Noah Bennett's daughter, was to keep your phone off as much as possible. She also kept the GPS permanently disabled. Arbucci hopped into the front passenger seat of the FUV and told the driver, "Go, go, go!" "Nick, what's going on?" Claire asked. "That's need to know right now, ma'am." "Okay." Claire wasn't satisfied, though. For one thing, that was the first time Arbucci had called her ma'am all day. The last time he'd been formal to a fault, always referring to her as ma'am or Ms. Petrelli. Then again, the biggest crisis last time was a kid in a Thor costume hitting her with a papier-mâché hammer. Soon enough, they'd arrived at Dulles and were rushed over to a private jet parked on a runway far away from the commercial terminals. Someone who looked like Secret Service was standing at the top of the small staircase that would fold up into the plane's door. Claire didn't recognize him, but it wasn't as if she knew every agent. "Right this way, ma'am," the agent said, taking Claire's overnight bag. "We'll need to take your phone, too." "It's off," she said as she climbed up the stairs and entered a very well-appointed private jet. "Well, we still need to confiscate it." "Fine. Look," she said as she took the phone out of her purse and handed it to the agent. "Will someone please tell me what's going on? Agent Arbucci said it was need to know, but..." Agent Arbucci was absolutely correct, ma'am," the agent said. "Buckle yourself in, please. We got a long trip ahead of us." "Where are we going?" But the agent just turned and headed toward the cockpit. With a sigh, Claire sat down in her chair and buckled herself in. The plane taxied down the runway for about 20 minutes before finally taking off. Claire spent that entire time staring out the window as there was nothing to read, and most of her usual entertainment was on her phone. Eventually, however, the plane took off. And only then did the agent come back, along with another man she didn't recognize. He was short, fat, and bald. "We're heading to an aircraft carrier," the short, fat, bald man said, and his voice sounded familiar. No, it wasn't his voice. It was his tone. It sounded a lot like how Nick Arbucci had been talking today. "What aircraft carrier? What the hell is going on?" Another man emerged from the cockpit, this one dressed in more casual clothes. I'm sorry for this, Claire, but it was necessary. My name is Dr. Richard Schwenkman. I work for a company known as the Lamarck Project, and we're very interested in your genes. Claire was not liking the sound of this. She unbuckled her seatbelt and started to stand up. Is the Lamarck Project part of the CIA or Homeland, or... Schwenkman chuckled. Hardly. Claire, I'm afraid the government doesn't really pay well enough to be worth my time, and you've been a bit misled. You see, the Lamarck Project is run by a consortium of businesses, most, though not all, of which are headquartered in the European Union. Your blood is the holy grail of genetics research, Claire, and we need to study you more closely. Cursing herself for not realizing it was a trick, although she wasn't sure how she could have realized it, since Arbucci was the one in the lead and she trusted him, Claire started to move toward the emergency exit. So you tricked Agent Arbucci? Another chuckle. Not exactly. Poor Mr. Arbucci is innocent of any wrongdoing, though I suspect he'll have a hard time proving that. I don't know what you're talking about, but I don't think you realize exactly who you're messing with. Oh, we're quite aware. Schwenkman sounded so incredibly smug. He reminded Claire of Seiler. Really? Then she ran toward the hatch. She'd open it and jump out. The landing would hurt like hell, but she'd heal. And then she'd make her way back to D.C. and contact the real Secret Service. Hell, she'd flag down a camera crew if she had to. It wouldn't be hard. She could just jump in front of a bus or something and get to the bottom of this. That, at least, was her plan. However, before she took a second step, the short, fat, bald man suddenly disappeared from her peripheral vision. It was like watching Hiro teleport. One moment he was there, the next he wasn't. Right after he disappeared, Claire stopped moving. She tried to continue walking forward, but she couldn't make her legs work. Or anything else. She could feel her eyes blink, feel her lungs inhale and exhale, but she had no control over any of it. She couldn't even talk. Then her voice said, "You're not going anywhere, Claire Bennet Petrelli. You're staying right here on this plane." She felt her body walk back to her seat and watched as she buckled herself in. Then she felt herself put her hands on the armrest of the chair, at which point Schwenkman took the additional step of strapping down her wrists. Then she found herself back in control, just as short, fat, and bald reappeared next to the obviously fake Secret Service agent. Staring at him, she said, "You can possess people." Bowing, the short, fat, bald man said, "Harold Esposito, at your service. We knew you'd believe one of the Treasury agents. We just had to wait until you got a pair where one of them actually went out to lunch." Claire shook her head. Looking back on it, it was impressively executed. And it only would have worked with Arbucci and Rodriguez. All the other agents stayed close by on their breaks. "So what now?" "Well," Schwenkman said, "if you try to escape again, Harold will possess you and he won't leave. In about 4 hours, we'll reach our carrier, which is in international waters, so the Coast Guard won't be able to interfere. I'm sure at this point, Agent Arbucci is checked in and trying desperately to convince his superiors that he was possessed by an Evo." "They'll probably believe him," Claire said defiantly. "Well, they might. But they won't be able to prove it." Schwenkman smiled. "I'm afraid Nick Arbucci's career is over. So probably is Naomi Rodriguez's." "And this makes you happy?" "Not as such," Schwenkman said. "It's just fascinating to me how important you Evos have become. My employers at Lamarck have spent a great deal of time, money, and effort to acquire you, and they were perfectly willing to ruin the lives of 2 people to do it." He moved toward the back of the plane. "That should let you know how important you are to us." The fake agent went back to the cockpit, while Esposito sat in another chair near Claire. As Esposito buckled himself in, Claire said, "I guess they paid you a lot of money, too." "Not enough, but that's not why I do it. I really don't need to work for money. I could just possess a random bank manager or something else, or someone else in charge of a lot of cash, walk out with a pile, and then leave them to accept the consequences. But that got kind of boring, so I decided to hire myself out." "So this is just a game to you?" "It's all a game, Claire. The sooner you realize that, the happier you'll be." "I was happy!" "Really? Talking to morons on TV. Waving at idiots freezing their asses off on Fifth Avenue on Thanksgiving, while standing next to people dressed like cartoon characters? Writing stupid editorials for the Washingtonian? Yeah, I read that. Your ghostwriter did a pretty good job." "I wrote that myself," she said defensively, which wasn't entirely true. It had actually been an interview with one of the magazine's reporters who then transcribed it and cleaned it up. But it was still in Claire's words. "Still, that wasn't a life. You were a figurehead for Evos. If you ask me, it was past time you retired from that job. It's a waste." Unable to stand looking at him anymore, Claire turned away and looked out the windows. All she saw were clouds. They were obviously over water, which meant her plan would have involved a whole lot of swimming if it had been successful. Maybe she'd be lucky and Esposito would take a nap. To be continued tomorrow, where I will continue Save the Cheerleader, Destroy the World. You can get the book as an ebook, either on its own or, at least I think you can on its own, I have to double check that, but you can definitely get the collection which was published by Titan, which was called Heroes Reborn Event Series Collection 2, which has mine and 2 other novellas in it. Check me out online at DeCandido.net. Read my blog at DeCandido.wordpress.com. And please support me on Patreon. Patreon.com/KRAD. All kinds of cool stuff. See you tomorrow, and please, stay safe.